Is everybody all set? Jerry, are we good?
Very good.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the November meeting for the Fairfield Board of Finance. Would everyone please rise? I'm going to ask the chairman of the Penfield Building Committee, Mr. Bradley, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Before we get started tonight, I think this is the first meeting that this board has had since Chief McNamara was involved in his accident, and we're very happy that he's recovering nicely and back to work. And I just wanted to note that our board sends along their best wishes to the chief on a speedy recovery, and we can't wait to have him back full-time to work. With that, tonight we have two items on our agenda. To hear, consider, and adopt the bond resolution appropriating funds for the repair of Penfield Pavilion and authorizing the issuance of bonds to finance such appropriation, and a copy of it's in our package. And then to hear and consider and adopt an updated fund balance policy, which is a policy that this board has been working on. Subcommittee of this board has been working on it for a year. We presented preliminary results to the RTM as a heads up to them last month. And this is our third meeting of discussing it, and we'll vote on that tonight after Penfield. Before we get started with the Penfield presentation, I did want to extend our thanks and appreciation to the members of the Penfield Building Committee. You all have worked very hard and diligent. I think it's been something like 13 or 14 months. It's been a tough project. There's been a lot of press coverage of that project, a lot of scrutiny of many options and many of the things that you've done, including you holding public forums, which, as this board can attest, is never an easy thing to do. But we'd like to thank you for all your hard work and effort. And please know that our questions tonight of either the building committee or comments regarding what happened with Penfield as a whole are no reflections or criticism of that building committee or the prior building committee, which did such a great job to bring that building to fruition in the first place. So we thank you for all your time and attention, and we thank you for being here tonight. At this time, I'd like to recognize the first selectman, and I've asked him to say a few words about the process that was started in the time frame of paneling the building committee, what their charge was, what the expectation was, and maybe what some of the thoughts of the Board of Selectmen are. And then we'll turn it over to our main presenters this evening. Thank you.
Mr. Flynn, thank you. I think that, as you pointed out, the building committee was impaneled, I think back in December of 13, Jim, when it was passed by the RTM. They were asked at that time to move as quickly as possible on this, and to that end, they set up a schedule, unlike the normal building committees where they would meet once a month. They set up a schedule to meet twice a month. They went through a tremendous amount of information in terms of the reviewing the documents and engineering analysis that have been done by DPW with outside engineers prior to the building committee being formed, in terms of reviewing the tapes of both Board of Selectmen presentations and an August public hearing, as well as any emails or feedback that the Board of Selectmen had received in our request to get feedback or comments on the charge as it was delivered. I think as you pointed out, definitely a lot of different opinions on this project. I think the committee sifted through those, held quite a few public hearings so they could get feedback on those. And you know, the simplest way to define the charge was asking the building committee to come up with the right solution for our community and think in the long term, not just the short term. So I was very impressed with how they tackled that and the manner in which they tackled that and the amount of diligence that they put in. The Board of Selectmen reiterated those comments at our meeting. Our meeting went almost 4 hours in reviewing the different building options as well as the finance options going through that. So we did pass it on unanimously to this board and hope that you will take your time, the time that's needed for you to come to a conclusion. Again, same charge as the building committee, that which is best for our community in your eyes.
Thank you, Mr. Tetro. Does any board member have any questions, comments at this time? Seeing none, we'll just recognize Mr. Bradley, and we'll turn it over to you, sir. And do you want to give a slide presentation as well?
Correct. I have, excuse me, I have some opening comments, and then we'll move right to a PowerPoint presentation, which was about the only format we could get as much information as we can to you and to the Board of Selectmen and hopefully to the RTM towards the end of the month. Thank you for recognizing me. I'm Jim Bradley, the chair of the Penfield Building Committee, and I'm here tonight with, I think, some members of the committee and Kevin Chamberlain, the project engineer retained by the committee, to present our recommended option and to reconstruct and repair the Penfield facility and request the appropriate funding for the project. Our presentation includes a written report to the Board of Selectmen, a PowerPoint presentation that provides a summary of the issues considered by the committee as it reached and debated various Penfield repair options, and a cost summary sheet that provides a cost comparison regarding options 1, 7, 8, and 9. All documents that you have should be dated October 30th, 2014. These were the documents reviewed by the committee at a special meeting on the same date. The committee continues to assume that funding sources, program justification, and support will be presented by others, that Parks and Rec and Finance. The report to the Board of Selectmen dated October 30th, 2014, and the PowerPoint presentation and the cost summary have been previously provided, and we assume have been distributed to all the appropriate parties, including this board. As you are aware, the committee was prepared to report to the Board of Selectmen, Board of Finance, and RTM in September. However, we elected to delay our presentations after hearing additional public concerns and requests for the committee to consider a low-cost or no-cost repair options. During September, the committee project engineer and the construction manager researched and developed scope and cost criteria and discussed two additional options. One assumed the complete demolition of the existing facility, and the other option, which was the lowest cost, and the other option was the smaller facility. It included demolition of the existing facility and design and construction of a much smaller facility without the gathering space or the gathering room. The committee has met twice a month since December 2013. We have provided 2 interim and 1 final reports to the Board of Selectmen, 1 early status report to the RTM, 1 status report to the Parks and Recreation Commission, and 1 presentation to the Fairfield Homeowners Association. We have requested, and the town has completed, certain security and make-safe measures to protect the building and modify the existing timber bulkhead. The committee directed the original engineer responsible for assessing the building damage immediately after Sandy to return to the site last month and conduct a follow-on inspection, so we wouldn't be facing the issue of nobody's looked at the building in a year and something else had happened and we were off base. So we're trying to reduce as many surprises as possible. The committee has completed a review of the original Penfield Penfield Pavilion project, the existing site and bulkhead conditions, the site impact on local flooding, that soils test borings and required additional test borings to be taken, analysis of the storm damage impact and risk, and regulatory requirements. With the assistance of our structural and coastal engineering firm and construction manager, we have developed and debated a variety of repair options, 11 in all total, resulting in a recommended repair and request for funding this evening. Early on, the Penfield Building Committee developed a detailed process flowchart and milestone event schedule as guides to identify all the issues and resources and maintain momentum. During the period from January through June, the committee heard presentations from a variety of experts, town official, structural, soils, and coastal engineers. I'd like to add that an overriding goal has been to provide the town, the various interested parties, and stakeholders with an informed and credible resource regarding the Penfield site, the building existing conditions, the future storm risk, and the scope and cost regarding the best repair option while balancing cost, program, and regulatory requirements and future risk. That was one of the goals of the committee. Now, I'd be happy, the basic guts of our report, our completed work is in the report that was provided to the Board of Selectmen. I hope everybody's had an opportunity. I'd be more than happy, it's 6 pages, I'd be happy to read it into the record per your direction.
Does anyone need this written or read into the record, or have we all been able to read it ourselves? No, thank you. We're all set?
Okay,
we're all set.
thank you. I forced the committee, I read it to the committee, and I already have the experience of eyelids slowly closing. So that would take us right to the PowerPoint presentation, which is probably the easiest way to understand what we've been up to.
Okay, so let's, I will move my big head so that you can use the board. Jim, you might need to move your big head as well. Yes, exactly. We're not going to go there.
Is that up there, or is that the lights that are? Yeah.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Turn off the lights.
At least those right on the screen there.
Yeah, it'd be great if you could.
Thank you. This is a brief overview. It consists of about 30 slides, and I hope will focus everybody. You really have to look at this presentation and read the report to get the full impact of our deliberations and what we've been considering. Everybody knows this, but right here is the locker wing, which has been referred to throughout as the east wing, and obviously this is the west wing. And the bulkhead, I don't know when this photograph was taken, but it's a benchmark photograph for us. Okay. The presentation agenda, committee charge, the pavilion history, the research and due diligence considerations background, and our repair options. And at the end, we have a slide that talks about the bulkhead improvements. As the first selectman just mentioned, we were formed in December 2003. On the 20th of December, we had our first meeting on site, where the Department of Public Works provided a complete walkthrough, or we could say crawl through, because we were underneath the building too, for the committee. The committee charge has, is pretty simple: review and recommend options and manage the repair. Having some background in this business, I agreed with the first selectman that it was important to come up with one recommendation, even though we presented for reference more than one option. And there's some guidelines that are included in the charge. Next one. The history, I think everybody knows it, purchased by the town in 1982, and the pavilion was reconstructed pretty much in its same footprint in 2 phases: the east wing, the lockers; the west wing, which was the rental hall, kitchen, restrooms. And the RTM voted on those 2 construction projects. Next slide. I think it's important for us to take a quick look at Tropical Storm Irene 2011. Here are a couple of photographs supplied by the Department of Public Works. This is a high wind storm with astronomical high tides, very high tides. Good, significant storm surge, but low wave energy. It's important to note that essentially the same thing happened to Irene, to a much lesser degree, of course, than Sandy. Water got underneath the building, and both ways. On the way in, it did some damage, pushing these boards back, and on the way out, it undermined these footings which are near the front entrance. And so the water, and if you were to see a picture of the building in the parking lot, you'd see where the water ran underneath the building from the parking lot and front entrance and out to where the firemen are there working right in this area. Next slide. So after Irene, there was an inspection by JMA, the structural engineers that did the inspection after Sandy. And there was some underpinning work performed right here. There was a protective bulkhead which was designed and constructed. The building structure was repaired and reopened. There were certain recommended modifications that were not completed before the arrival of Sandy. And those modifications include some structural work underneath the building, and they also included a recommendation that some form of protection be put around and over the footings in case another storm came. That was a recommendation from JMA, the inspecting engineer. Next slide, please. Then we have Tropical Storm Sandy, which we're all well aware of. These are pictures of the storm, probably low tide, because the tide never went out. And here is the picture of the culprit as far as the erosion underneath the building. There were 7 openings left in the bulkhead for passage, easy access to the beach. And those bulkheads had a well-designed concept of weir boards, which were supposed to be dropped in and in steel channels. And that's exactly what was done. Those weir boards were installed before the storm, and sand was piled on the front of along the front of the bulkhead, not there now, and also dumped over behind the bulkhead. The storm was severe, obviously, and the waves came and bounced off and up. They hit the bulkhead, went up in the air, and dumped a lot of water behind the bulkhead, and the tide came in behind the bulkhead anyway. But what happened was there was a lot of saturation of this sand all behind the bulkhead, and it became partially liquefied. And this is what nature does. This is nothing new to any bulkhead or any beachfront structure. When the sand was eroded down to about this level by the storm, this bulkhead ended up as a dam holding water and saturated sand behind it. And it found a way out right here. That dark opening, that dark spot right there is actually an opening. The weir boards did not go all the way down. And so it was a combination of significant beach erosion and a tremendous amount of water around the bulkhead. So when the water tried to get back to Long Island Sound, as we all know if we lived on, near, around the beach, it was going to find its way. And one of the ways it found is right through underneath the pavilion after it found its solution channel right here. And it eroded this out. This beach was higher before this blew out. It was up to about here. But it wasn't high enough over this opening to have enough weight and enough structure to stop the water from coming through. Next slide. So the net result was significant undermining of the building. And these are the footings, and this is the area. They are actually hanging in the air, which is a tribute to the design of the building. It's a little weird to say it. It seems kind of backwards, and it is. It's supposed to go the other way. The building's supposed to be sitting on the footing, not the footing hanging from the building. Subsequently, these footings were all shored up so that no additional significant damage happened to the building. Here's another example. These are the undermined footings, additional ones, some partially undermined, some completely undermined, and you can see the structural damage to the building. These are glue-lam beams. They're like laminated beams, and they don't do well under these conditions. Here's an example of floor settlement. If you were to scale this and have a ruler against it, it would be about 5 inches. These are BX cables, And therein lies another problem, and that is the possibility that the electrical system was, these wires up in the walls were stretched and some wires possibly pulled out of the junction boxes. So the building was deemed unsafe by the town building officials, and we agree with that, and we went on to actually try to make it safer. We didn't. The town hired a contractor to take the glass out of the wall that faces Long Island Sound and do other measures to stabilize the building. To simply go down the list, we asked for and had completed additional security fencing. There was an inspection of the gas and electrical systems. There was an alarm system there. We had it upgraded and monitored. One of the classic problems with an abandoned building is vandalism, and the one thing we wanted to do is keep everybody out of it, especially the kids. And then I guess one of the most important things is right here, and that is that the holes, the slots, the 7 of them in the bulkhead have been closed. A contractor was retained, and those openings have been closed to the same design criteria as the existing bulkhead. Next slide. I'd like to just make a quick reference to our due diligence and our research. We obviously had access, as did our engineer, to the Phase 1 and Phase 2 construction documents. We had multiple pieces of correspondence and reports and follow-on reports from JMA, the forensic engineering firm, Roberge Associates, referred to in some of the documents as RACE, R-A-C-E, who are coastal consulting engineers, and Heller and Johnson, geotechnical engineers. I might add that you happen to have 3 very competent regional firms in this particular list. Obviously, there was an insurance claim, which took a long time for the town and the insurance company to negotiate because there were definite differences between the forensic engineer's estimate and cost of repair and the insurance company's estimate and cost of repair. So there were 3 separate estimates here: Wakely, Romano, and Saugatuck Construction Group. We did proceed in June with engineer and architect and construction manager interviews. We did ask each of the candidates, this is a competitive process, we asked each of the candidates to provide us with their solutions as part of their interviewing process. So we said, if you want to come and interview after we recognize your qualifications and accept you for interviewing, we want you to come forward and tell us what you think. And if you're thinking, if you really put some time and effort into this and you're thinking about it, obviously it's going to be helpful for us to be impressed with you. We obviously had done our best as far as public input. The committee received a tremendous amount of correspondence, and we've had more than adequate input, and we went all the way back, by the way, to the August 2013 public hearing, and everybody was required reading to sit through that tape. We took it upon ourselves after we developed our process chart to look for and receive full presentations from the following: the J.M. Albane, they were the forensic structural engineer. Roberge Associates was a sub-consultant to the structural engineer above, and so was Heller and Johnson. We had more than one presentation from Fairfield Department of Public Works and the Engineering Department. We asked for and received a couple of meetings with the Building Department, and we had a tremendous presentation from Tom Stanke from Conservation, which included a lot of information about the beach and the accretion of sand and loss of sand. And obviously we had a lot of information from Jerry as far as Parks and Recreation. Town Planning and Zoning, a lot of input from Jim Wendt regarding FEMA and the town risk management. We did participate through the chair with the meetings with the insurance, regarding the insurance settlement, and we did have a presentation from the town risk manager. We heard on several occasions from Flood and Erosion Control Board, and we did require additional soils borings. So to give you kind of an example of what we went through and who we heard from, we would dedicate a full meeting or a half a meeting, depending on the depth and breadth of the presentation, to these particular entities. We ended up looking at a lot of factors, as you might imagine. The simplest one, of course, is the extent of the foundation damage. When I say look at these factors that we considered, we looked at these factors in concert with either an architect or engineer or whoever we could find would be the best person to talk to about one of these particular issues. So the extent of foundation damage, the cause of the damage, the contributing factors, the feasibility of repairs, the kind of constructability issues, can it actually be, can a particular repair be actually be done, economically done? The site and existing soil conditions, we had a lot of issues with that, frankly. Not issues with what was done, but issues just getting data. The footing depths, were they the right depths? Were they adequate? Alternate foundation designs and soil bearing capacity, augured piles, sectional piles, coastal storm impacts, past and future, coastal storm protection, FEMA. If you want to just bury yourself sometime between, it would take more than a Sunday. You'd lose more than one football game. Sometime go on the FEMA site. But we did finally figure out what we needed and what we had to deal with FEMA. Beach accretion and loss. This is an area that everybody along the beach is obviously aware of. And there are historical shifts, there's long-term shifts. Our feeling is that the long-term shift, unless the beach is replenished, is loss, even though there are years or periods or springs or seasons of accretion, added sand. We took a very hard look at the existing timber bulkhead and its location and performance. We obviously spent time on the site impact on the neighborhood flooding. Constructability and project safety important because a couple of the options actually sounded great but weren't safe. I would reference in particular the fact that raising the building, to put auger piles or sectional piles, the experts came down from Keller or I've forgotten which, Hayward Baker, I guess, to look at driving piles underneath the building alongside the damaged footings. You can't do it without raising the building. So the idea was to raise the building right where it is, right next to the beach. So the building movers take one look at that and they go, we're not going to guarantee holding this building up another 6 feet in the air while you drive piles under it and we have another storm and it hits the blocking and shoring and cribbing that the building is sitting on. And we actually don't want anybody underneath the building because we're not comfortable with holding the building up on sand. Well, anyway, that's where they came from. That's the kind of input we got. Project cost obviously was a big issue, and our project manager doing pre-construction cost, Shawmut Design and Construction, did a good job in running numbers all over the place for us. Cost recovering funding sources, we obviously have been working with the town fiscal officer regarding that, and with Joe Michelangelo. Insurance claims were obviously an issue, and schedule was an issue. We tried every which way to Sunday to get the schedule in and get the problem solved so that we would have the building back on stream for summer 2015. The repair options, as I noted earlier, we reviewed 11 options. 8 were in the final, got the most attention, and 3 after the 8/14 meeting. We had a member, Bill Sapone, who had a good option, which was to tear down the lockers and build a foundation there, and then simply move the building once from where it is at West Wing, from where it is now, over to where the East Wing is. We had problems making that work. We didn't, the engineer and architect did. We ended up with 4 repair options, which really span the entire 11 in a way. We call option 1 repair and protect. We call option 8 complete demolition and site restoration. We call option 9 demolition and construct a smaller facility, and option 7, our recommendation, modify and raise the building. A couple of facts, background. The appraised value is important, and it's currently been considered by the insurance company as $5,400,000. As you all know from the beach area, if you've had any experience in this, if your construction costs, careful to say construction costs, exceed 50% of the estimated value of the building, the appraised value, then you must comply with FEMA. And in our case, it would mean complying with FEMA today under the new V-zone, which came into effect in 2013, means raising the building and putting it on piles, whether anybody likes it or not. So if costs start to get near $2.6 million to repair the building, then you get kicked into the next category, or the category of having to comply with FEMA. We also face consistently that the construction and coastal and constructional engineering recommendations were that the building should be resupported on a new flood-resistant pile foundation system. You can read the Connecticut Code that way, and you certainly can read the engineering standards, the ASCE standards, that way. This might be a good time to take a break and look at some graphics. We asked that this be prepared both for the committee and also for our presentations, because this helps us talk a little bit about what we're trying to do. If you were to say, let's just take a look at the existing east wing foundations, and you were to say, just slice us, let's put a slice right through the building, a vertical slice like a cake cutter, right through the building and right through the footing, you'd have a section like this. You'd have the floor, you'd have a pier support, you'd have the famous footing, you'd have the sand underneath, you'd have the peat. There was a lot of talk about this, and there is, underneath the entire beach site, with one exception, a layer from 2 to 6 feet of organic material. You can call it peat. We'd all recognize it as mud and bog material, root mass, and it's typical of a coastal region where the coastline is moving back over the old marshes, which were on the fringes of most of our coastline. So if you were to dig down and look, take a section under the east wing, you'd find this condition. You'd find this condition under the west wing because in this particular case, this material was excavated out, and crushed stone, not shown here, and sand was put back in. So the footings, before they were damaged by the storm, were sitting on this newly installed material when the footings were constructed. Again, the pier, the footing itself, and when a reference is made to shallow footings, it just means that the footing is not as deep as you might think. This is considered a shallow footing. And it's perfectly suitable for certain types of on-sand construction, because sand can be very dense and doesn't freeze, and you're not going to have heaving, which you would have at your house. So this is where the sand was after the storm. The sand was down here, and the town went back in and shored up the void underneath. If you were doing a pile-supported foundation, you wouldn't care what the condition of this material is or what the condition of this material is. You'd want to get down into this material, which is very dense sand. And so you'd have the floor. Now it's up to the new FEMA elevation. You'd have the pier. You'd have the grade beam. You'd have the concrete pile cap, a timber-driven pile, tapered pile, all the way down into this good material. That's a classic, standard beachfront construction for commercial buildings and homes.
Excuse me,
Yes.
standard practice since when?
Well, it's certainly standard practice as far as FEMA is concerned, and I think that it's probably standard practice if you're building anywhere near a tidal zone or a beachfront, especially if you have an underlying layer from 6 to 7 feet, or, I mean, from 2 to 6 feet of peat. Either you have to remove all that material, or you have to get some, you should, you don't have to do anything, but you should drive that through. I'll ask Kevin at the end of the meeting to give us a reference for standard practice.
But we should have done this in 2008, 2010, right?
Well, you know, I don't know. We made, the committee made a commitment to move forward, and standard practice, the industry, the beachfront coastal industry was, for years, a significant amount of art and some amount of science. And over the past 2 decades, it has become increasingly more science and less art. So you would find this approach discussed much more today than you would even a year or 2 or 3 or 10 years ago. But we didn't go back and look at what was right or what was wrong. We just dealt with what we were given. Next slide, please. So some background. As I mentioned, the FEMA flood zone, which impacts all coastal construction within the zone, was changed in 2013 from an A zone, moderate wave action, to a V zone, high velocity wave action. And the original construction, as we see it today, was to FEMA AE zone. An A zone, same as the AE zone. Flood elevation is 11 to the finished floor. The V zone, which would now be plus 13 to the finished floor, to the bottom of the lowest horizontal structural element. So this actually is a little bit higher when it finished floor. For us, it means that if you were to repair the building and reconstruct it to the V zone, it would be 3.5 feet higher than it is today. This is something that you could take home and look at. It's a little confusing, but it shows the entire, this is kind of what we had to do to make sure we could keep our elevation straight. This is a section through the entire site, from Long Island Sound high tide all the way up the beach. It's to scale. The top of the bulkhead elevation, the finished floor elevation, the site elevation, the break at the parking lot elevation, and the street elevation. It's hard to maintain sense when it comes to the elevation. So to look at the options, and believe me, this is the short version. It doesn't sound like it, but it really is, especially when it comes to this part. The repair and protect in place option is one, and for all intents and purposes, and for the purposes of our discussion, it really means a scope of work. And when I say scope of work, and I'll use that often, it's the entire work done on site to build. So you could say the building, or you could say the building of the building, the construction of the building, or you could say scope of work. So the building is repaired in place, which means the building doesn't get moved at all. We go to the insurance company estimate and we underpin, which means we add concrete in that space you saw under the footings, which were undermined and failed. And then we place this is our idea, not theirs. They don't want to pay for this. A layer of surge stone underneath the west wing, which means about 18 inches of stone of various size and crushed stone, trap rock you might think of, underneath the building to stop the erosion in the future. It is a make-safe option. It is not an engineered option. And then you'd construct a low bulkhead across the north parking lot. And the reason you do that is to make sure this blanket of stone stays under the west wing and water surging out from the neighborhood doesn't get underneath this blanket and cause the erosion. So the cost estimate, schematic cost estimate, I'll speak to that in a minute, is $3,222,044. There were pros to this. It was low cost as long as the FEMA threshold didn't get exceeded. There's no impact on the town programming or the use of facilities, and the operating income is not impacted. The cons were shallow spread footings were to remain. The repaired building not FEMA compliant. Obviously, the risk of recurrence of damage from Sandy. The final cost could exceed the FEMA threshold, kicking us into a more costly design and construction, a project. and the high risk for the scope of work. And the reason that line item is there is that there's a level of difficulty brought to our attention in underpinning the footings. The building department has already sent a signal that they will want geotechnical engineering from top to bottom, from start to finish, separate third-party engineer to monitor any repairs underneath the footing, to make sure that the footings go back on good, sound sand. So somehow you'd have to put concrete under those footings and make sure as you're digging down that you found good, firm sand, and then inserted the concrete, formed and placed the concrete under the footings. But most importantly, the engineering team, DeStefano and Chamberlain, does not recommend the foundation repair, or recommend or the recommendation does not include, or a recommendation that does not include a deep foundation or a pile foundation and elevating the building. I might add that there were some comments on this over the past couple of months about the fact of there must be an engineer. Well, we have a problem there because we've asked the 3 engineers that have been involved in this project, and the 3 engineers that have been involved in this project say they would not do this without, they would not repair this unless it was on a pile-supported foundation. So as an entity, as a town, as an owner, you have in your file recommendations, pretty straightforward recommendations, that the repair not assume the rebuilding of the existing footings in accordance with the insurance requirement. That doesn't mean the town couldn't do it. That just means the town would take risk. So the committee did not recommend this. We did, and I can make this short on this one, complete demolition. We looked at this carefully because it was suggested in the public forum, and I think it was suggested just to kind of find out what our real broad spectrum of options are. It's pretty simple. It's removal of the building in its entirety and the creation of a dune or berm at plus 12 to protect the neighborhood from the Burrell Pavilion to Ricketts Beach. $880,000. Certainly the lowest cost option. There is some site protection added, so it does have some added flood mitigation. The cons are obvious, and especially the last one, creates a safety and convenience issues, distance to first aid and lifeguard station and bathrooms. Not recommended by the committee. Option 9 was also brought forward late in the process, and that was demolition of the current building, both wings, foundations, bulkhead to remain. By the way, in option 8, total demolition, the bulkhead is cut down and left in place. It's cut down about 5 feet below the beach. So it's still, we didn't tear it all out, we just left it down there for convenience. This option is designed to build a new, smaller pavilion, which essentially has the same features as the existing facility without the gathering room. If you're already starting to think, well, why don't you just tear the gathering room down and leave what's left? It's, believe it or not, and by today's standards, it's cheaper to tear it all down and rebuild it as a smaller facility, given what we are given, the circumstances and the existing structures. So you'd have a timber pile-supported foundation, you'd have a new building, and it would have restrooms, shower, day lockers, lifeguard, concession stand. Conceptual cost estimate, $2.8 million. Pros, it's a low-cost option. It would be a facility built to FEMA standards. It stays within the current footprint, which we have to do, otherwise we have to go back to zoning. And it's a low risk regarding future flood damage. The cons are existing town asset pavilion would not be utilized. In other words, like the gathering room. The town programming is restricted with a loss of revenue and additional schedule impacts. We'd have to kind of start from scratch. Not recommended by the committee. Option 7 is the option that's been recommended by the committee, and it's been on the table for a long time with us, and we've worked and reworked this, and we actually have design development drawings for this particular option because the committee felt that we should proceed and get the best numbers we could. This is demolish the east wing in its entirety, and demolish the existing decks, which I might add happen every time. You're not going to move the old wood decks. It's just not economically feasible. Lift and move the west wing to the parking lot and repair the structure while it's out in the parking lot. And while that's going on, construct a new timber and pile foundation. And this particular option has, where you saw those broken and damaged beams, split beams, they actually get removed, all of them, and new steel elements support the floor structure. That allows a reduction in building height and also turns out to be simply a better way to construct the building or support the building structurally. And this also includes a berm connecting Durrell and Rickards Beach. We move the west wing back in place. It's raised up 3.5 feet. We repair any remaining damage. We construct a smaller east wing with restroom, changing area, day lockers, and exterior decking. One of the things that George Wiles, the original architect, said was that you could use more restroom areas at peak loads. So these additional restrooms and showers would be an advantage. We'd fill beneath and around the building, and we construct on-grade decking, and Kevin's going to give you a brief description of that in a minute with the plan and section drawings. The cost for this is $4,558,399, and it's referred to as a design development estimate. The estimates in this whole exercise are conceptual. That means that they are takeoffs, but in square foot areas and comparative and input from subcontractors and so forth. This estimate happens to have drawings. The other estimates do not. They have a typewritten scope of work as a substitute for the drawing. So this has a better probability of being accurate than the other numbers. So the pros are minimal risk, obviously because it's raised up to the fee zone. The existing town asset is reused. Original amenities are in place. FEMA standards are met. Increased parking, there's about 9 additional spaces. The engineer's opinion, obviously, is a recommended solution. The design will reduce risk for future storm damage. It's actually a smaller, better, more attractive facility, especially when you see it in the elevations, which Kevin will show you. The cons are obviously it's a higher cost, and there is a reduction in programming due to the removal of the 200 lockers. This was the committee's recommendation, and it's been a recommendation for the past 2.5 or 3 months. So I'm just going to point this out before Kevin steps up here. This obviously is the locker wing, and this would be demolished. And the decks would be removed around the west wing. The west wing would be moved diagonally out on the parking lot. Can we move it? Oh. This is about as fast as it would happen. So it would be out in the parking lot, and while it was out in the parking lot here, as strange as it may seem, the foundations would be installed, and here's an example, a close-up example of the foundations. Okay. Now, this is the last slide, so you can poke your neighbor to wake up. This, one of the things about the bulkhead is we wanted to see that those openings were all infilled. That work has been done. All the options assume I believe, I'd have to go double check, but the ones that we're dealing with, especially option 7, assumes that you would dig down in front of the existing bulkhead and install a riprap revetment, a stone revetment just like this, and then put the sand back. That is in an effort to both break up the wave energy if the sand gets eroded, instead of having the wave hit the bulkhead directly and go up in the air and down, and to protect the bulkhead from erosion. So it's belts and suspenders as far as the bulkhead is concerned. We think the bulkhead should stay. And so, Kevin, with that, if you'd give us a non-PowerPoint, old-fashioned presentation.
Where's the best place for everybody to see this?
Maybe right there. In the front? Really? You want to try it right here, right? Yeah, right ahead. Yeah.
Yours is very lightweight.
So our goal here is to ask Kevin to describe what's envisioned in option 7.
Okay, thank you. Again, Kevin Chamberlain with Stefano and Chamberlain. We're the committee's architect and engineer for the project. So as Chairman Bradley described, option 7 is kind of a middle-of-the-road solution between the two bookends, the, lift and move the entire building versus just doing a limited repair. With option 7, as he described, we take the locker wing off completely. We remove the existing decks that are around the remaining west wing, move the building into the parking lot temporarily to do the work necessary to put in a new foundation system, put the original west wing back exactly where it was on the new foundation system, and then construct a smaller east wing. The smaller east wing would basically take the spaces that were bathrooms or are bathrooms currently in the east wing, and you would still have those spaces. They would be built from new construction, but you would have bathroom stalls, showers, changing cubicles, male and female. You would not have the lockers, but you would have the restroom spaces. Around that, we would build decks that would interconnect with the existing west wing decks and also help provide traffic flow, pedestrian traffic flow around the building. Because the building will now be elevated approximately 3.5 feet higher than it is, it's more important that we have good access to the building because it's higher. We would still have the main entrance being in the front of the building, facing the parking lot. There would be more stairs, obviously, to get up to the building. Our general approach is to try to tier the site so that it's not as shocking a look as having something that's an entire story above grade, that you actually have this mid-level under the building that's filled up and landscaped in the front to soften it. We would maintain the existing handicap ramp from the west parking lot that currently goes up and connects to the building near the lifeguard area. We would have to detach it from that because the building is moving up, but the ramp is not. We would then provide another ramp along the front of the building to then connect to the area by the front entrance. We would put in a new ramp system at the east end of the site that connects to the new east addition, so that you would have two primary points of handicap access to the building, one at the east end of the building, one at the west end of the building. We would still have the structured deck areas that are currently covered around the existing west wing. The areas that project out beyond the covered roof, as well as the areas of deck that are lost on the east wing when it's demolished, we would make up by putting a mid-level of decking that actually just lays on the sand around the rear of the building facing the water. And there's a couple reasons why we felt this was a good design approach. One is that it creates a transitional space from the building that's up at elevation 14.5 and the beach that's down around elevation 10. And also, it's a less expensive way to put back all the decking that was there. So it was both a cost issue as well as a way to handle the fact that the building is higher. When the work is completed, we'll wind up with a big area. where the east addition or the east wing used to be, which can be freed up for recreation space. The existing bulkhead would remain that wraps the building. As Chairman Bradley mentioned, we would have riprap that would be built in front of the bulkhead, which does a couple of things. It armors the bulkhead so that during a storm, if sand is lost in front of it, you don't have a failure of the bulkhead. It actually braces the wall. The other thing it does is it helps dissipate wave energy, so that if the sand in front of it is eroded, the waves can roll up the face of the boulders and actually break up and lose energy. The existing spaces in the west wing would remain as is, except for obviously any cosmetic, structural, or mechanical repairs that are needed. The parking lot in front of the building, actually we're able to free up a few more spaces, I believe about 6 spaces, between the existing east wing and the edge of the current parking lot with this design. And as far as the continuous berm that was mentioned, the boulders will be used to create a crest up at elevation 12 that goes from Rickards Beach, wraps around the face of the bulkhead, and ties in with the existing stone retaining wall by the west parking lot, which then continues over to the Durrell Pavilion. And those are the high points of the design.
Could you just point out each space, just quickly going from west-east, what those, for people in the back, what those labels are for the rooms?
Okay. This area over here is the existing playground area next to the Durrell Pavilion. Currently, there's structured deck that's attached to the building that would be scaled back and would be replaced with on-grade decking, which is this kind of pink color right here. So that wraps around from the lifeguard area, around the concession area, around the gathering hall, and then around the new east addition to the building. We would have stair access points at numerous locations up and over the bulkhead in order to get down to the beach. We would also have at least 2 places, and possibly more as needed, wheeled access points to the beach, so that if you're up at the area around the building, you can get out to the beach without having to go up a set of stairs.
Okay, why don't we look at the elevation?
Okay. The most significant change to the appearance of the building is the fact that it will be higher and it won't be as long. The area where the east wing is scaled back. It's finished with a hip roof to blend into the existing roofs on the building. Here you can see this light brown color, which is a low timber wall in front of the building that helps handle the terrace grade condition under the building. So the building's up at elevation 14.5. The grade underneath the building's at elevation 11 approximately, and the parking lot's down at elevation 8. So you have 3 levels in effect. And you see a similar condition at the water side of the building, where currently the east wing heads out in this direction and it's been scaled back.
Okay, thank you. I think that does it, and maybe we'll put those off to the side just in case there are questions. That concludes our presentation, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Give everybody just a second to get back to the table. Thank you, Mr. Bradley. Thanks. Before we go on to questions and answers, so your recommendation and the recommendation that's before us is option 7. That's what the Board of Selectmen voted on last week. Mr. Mayor, can you just walk us through, since this is the Board of Finance, the economics of this briefly, and then I'll turn it over to questions to board members on the presentation that we just saw.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
the full presentation that the Board of Selectmen saw actually allowed for the Parks and Rec group to get up and add some comments in here on the programming and function.
That's great. I'll do that. I appreciate that. Thank you. But, Mr. Mayor, can we hear about the economics of option 7?
All right. All right. Okay, first of all, I'm going to give you another package because the numbers have changed.
Seriously?
Seriously.
So the numbers that the Board of Selectmen voted on were not the right numbers?
They've changed.
What does that mean?
Well, I'm going to go through the presentation here with a little introduction, and we'll get
So wait a minute, when did these numbers change?
well, let me give my presentation.
Well, no, I think we need to address the change first, because...
The numbers changed. I mean, it would flow smoother and more clearly and understandably if you allow it to be presented in the presentation. However, you are the chair and the board.
Give me the bottom line figure on what the number change was. What did the Board of Selectmen?
There's two minor change, one minor change. Actually, they're both minor changes. The number that changed is option 1A, excuse me, 1B. But it increased $200,000. The email that we got from the from FEMA changed by $60,000. That number changed by $60,000, and which is not a big deal at all.
Up or down in what
The
option?
200,000, the option 1A. That's what I said, or 1B. Excuse me. The $200,000 up.
Okay,
The FEMA number is 60,000 less.
okay.
Okay, and
So that means that that changed by $260,000 to the bad.
no. You have to go through the numbers to see how it falls out.
Okay, let's go to
You have through
option,
the-
what
have to
about
go through-
option 7, the option that's before us
That
right now?
didn't change.
Well, that's an important safety tip. Let's talk to option 7 for a minute, since that's,
Well, I'd like to give my I'd like to give my introduction.
that's good, but I'd like to hear about the option 7 number. Let's walk through that, and then you can give your
I'd like to,
presentation. Please, option 7.
okay, turn to page 2A. You would understand this maybe more clearly if I gave the presentation, but we'll go through it. Option 7 is on both page 2 and 2A.
Of what?
It's on page 2.
In the very back of the presentation book.
2 and 2A.
Go right ahead. Just walk us through these two options. The option 7.
The difference between option 7A and 7B is the project is the exact same project.
Okay.
It is, when we submit to FEMA, the process of which I was going to explain, FEMA then makes decisions. FEMA could classify project 7 as either, and what I have listed here is 7A, which would be an original building repair and/or improve, or they could classify it as a 7B, which would be an alternative project. The alternative project is reimbursed under a completely different formula, both the percentage reimbursement and the methodology, the way the amount is reimbursed, and therefore the cost of the project is higher to the town if they designated a 7B by $600,000.
Okay, so under this scenario, under option 7, depending on a decision to be made by FEMA, this scenario net to the town could cost us anywhere from $1.2 million, rough number, right, to $600,000 number. It's 1.168 versus 575, correct?
It is 1208 to 576.
1208.
Correct.
Okay. Explain that to me, because I have the net town
That's because
funding.
you don't have the new documents yet.
You just told me that the funding documents for 7, you said option
Says-
7 doesn't change.
The funding, the option, if you go to 7B, the top, the formula for the alternative projects, the reimbursement formula is not based upon the project cost. It's based upon a project worksheet, that's the PW, repair estimate that FEMA develops. In the conference call on October 23rd, FEMA indicated that number was $4,188,000, which is the number that's on your document. When we received the email providing us an overview of the conference call plus other information, that 4188 changed to 4128. That 4128 then is the maximum amount that the town, that is used by FEMA to calculate the town's reimbursement for alternative projects. The formula for the reimbursement calculation for alternative projects is you take 90% of that number, you reduce it by your insurance deductible, and then you take 75% of the net.
Okay. So in fact, in the numbers before us for option 7, the numbers did actually change.
In 7B, yes, sir.
Okay. In 7A, those numbers did not change because the entire cost
The
can
cost
be-
did not change, and and that's reimbursable. The project number did not change, and that is reimbursable based upon the project cost.
Okay. So at the end of the day, the project in front of us that we're asked to vote on, and this is why I asked you to go, and I'm not trying to shortcut your presentation. I'm trying to get option 7 in its entirety in front of us.
Right.
Okay. The cost differential, it's either going to cost us $1.2 million or $600,000,
Roughly speaking, yes, sir.
depending on a FEMA decision related to how they categorize those costs.
Exactly.
Okay. Mrs. Albin, did you have something?
I wanted, I'm listening to the fiscal officer, and it sounds as though you have more recent numbers. Is this correct?
The 1418, that number was received on November 4th, I think, or 5th, I don't remember, or 6th. I have the email here somewhere.
So the numbers before us.
And then
in
the other number
document-
that changed is on your option 1B, you have $5,558,000, which was the, that's on page 2. There's been a refinement from the building committee on that number. So that number is now $5,758,000.
Okay. So that's the total project cost. So let's put that to the side for a second, okay? Just let's put that option to the side for a second and deal with option 7, okay? So, Mr. Lombardo, could you come on up and speak to option 7, please? What I'm trying to do is get a whole picture of the option that the Board of Selectmen, and then we'll go back and look at a couple of the other options. Is that okay with everybody?
I just have one question to the chair, is how are we voting on something, or potentially voting on something, when the Board of Selectmen didn't have accurate numbers when they were considering this? I mean, there's numbers that are completely in flux that the Board of Selectmen, I see 2 of the members here, didn't have before them. So I don't understand why this isn't kicked back to the Board of Selectmen to have the most up-to-date analysis of what they should be voting on.
Very valid. Let's ask that question when we get to the differences in option 1B. Let's hear from Mr. Lombardo, unless anybody else has any other comments right now. Mr. Lombardo, can you talk to option 7? And your thoughts on it?
Good evening. Option 7 is obviously without the lockers. And when it was first brought, when the Penfield Building Committee first brought it to our attention, there was a significant differential in the building costs back in July with the numbers. I believe, and Jim can correct me, I believe it was a $7 million project cost versus a $4 million project cost without the lockers. They came to the Parks and Recreation Commission, and prior to that, they had asked me, you know, what I thought about the programming standpoint. And while we prefer having the lockers and having the facility that we presently have in place, we really couldn't justify the financial differential in the $3 million to have the lockers when we bring in roughly about $38,000 a year on revenue to cover that. Although we want the lockers, okay, if everything being said. So, again, when the building committee went to present on a week ago to the Board of Selectmen, the numbers, because they weren't working with all the financial numbers either, they were just working with the building cost. And the FEMA report was presented, and we all noticed that there was a cost differentials between, obviously, 7 without the lockers and with the lockers. And I know in the chairman's presentation of the Parks and Recreation Commission, you know, we prefer having the facility as we presently have, with the amenities that we presently have, as it was vetted several years ago, that the community wanted, that was working. Unfortunately, the storm hit. But from a cost differential, we couldn't justify a $3 million price differential. We thought the commission was working from a, trying to be financially prudent, okay, as to where we could best not only provide services to the community, but also bring in some revenues to help offset the cost and debt service that we have incurred with the facility.
Mr. Brown, then I'll go to Mr. DeWitt. Thank you, Mr. Lombardo.
That option would be option 1, correct? With the lockers? 1B.
Yes, 1B.
Okay. On page 21 of the PowerPoint, one of the cons to 1B is repaired building not FEMA compliant.
1A is building it, repair and
So
replace.
1B is FEMA compliant?
Yes.
So if 1B is FEMA compliant, and you get what you want, what's the number? 826 plus 260,000?
No, sir. It's 876. The 1B with the updated numbers is 876,000.
Total?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, did the Board of Selectmen consider 1B? I know they were voting on option 7. That was a bonding resolution, I get that.
The
But
as Jerry just stated, my involvement in this project was early on when we were negotiating with the insurance companies, and then it kind of shifted to the building committee, and I got involved this last month, as we started trying to put this information together. So I wasn't there, I have no idea, but as Jerry just stated, there was a time when somehow the communication, or what was understood by the Parks and Rec Commission, that 1B would cost $3 million more than 7. Now, what happened when I was putting the numbers together, and given the education that I received, immersing myself in FEMA in the last month, and understanding the concept and the differences between original and alternative calculations and reimbursement methodologies, calculation methodologies. When I was doing the work, I saw that when you look at 7 under, if it was designated an alternative project, that it costs $1.2 million. And also, in having sat through some of the meetings and listened through some of the information, based upon what was available at the time, there was an option that the building committee had, which was 3C. Okay. I was not exactly aware of 3C. I'd heard conversations about if you did this, if you did this, if you did that, how much it would cost extra. So at that time, when I prepared the package based upon the best information I had, I used the $5,558,000 for option 1B. Okay? In the hallway, prior to the Board of Selectmen meeting, while Mr. Bradley was giving his presentation, Mr. Lombardo asked me about 1B because he said, well, this is only $250,000 more. It's not $3 million more. So that's the first time that the Parks and Rec Committee knew the actual numbers related to 1B. So when we went into that meeting, there was a 1B, but it hadn't had time to be absorbed or thought about or considered. Then, after that, we met with Mr. Bradley, who, and for various reasons, which he can explain, that option, which he had had in his paperwork as 3C, had been discarded early on. And they went and refined their numbers. And I received an email from the building committee a couple of days ago, Monday, I guess, Tuesday, I don't know, maybe it was yesterday. It wasn't yesterday. Might have been yesterday. That told me the number was, instead of 5.558, would be a 5.758. So we made the changes to the documents today so that this board would have the best and latest information.
Yeah. Okay, Mr. Mayor, quick question for you. Total project cost on option number 1B, you're saying is now $5,758,000 as opposed to $5,558,000?
Yes, sir.
Doesn't that take the net town funding for the project from $826,000 to $1,026,000?
No, sir, because of the 75% reimbursement factor.
Okay. Question. Mr. Bradley, has this option 1B was new information, this economic option, to your board as of when?
Well, the 10th or 11th of November. I replied to the first selectman and Mr. Mayor on November 11th. The question was...
When was the Board of Selectmen meeting on this? The 11th. November 5th?
Right.
So, and your board wasn't given this information till November 11th?
Correct. I think I first...
Has your board vetted this option bid?
No. No,
Option 1B hasn't been vetted by your board.
we call, just for the record, we call, I'm not sure about option 1B. Our option 3C, that's been part of the committee's deliberations from the get-go, is equivalent to what has been done here for option 1B. So we had to go back and look with the construction manager and the engineer as to what, now the 3C, after 3 months, was back in play, and understandably so, because it was now being driven by new FEMA numbers, which we didn't have access to.
Has your board had a meeting since you
No,
got this?
no. We were
Okay.
simply asked to make sure that the number was correct.
Okay.
So,
Thank you, Mr. Bradley.
At this point, Mr. Chair, with all the new information that the board has not really seen and had a chance to meet on.
Can I interrupt, please?
No, actually, you can't.
It is
No.
not
No.
Actually, you can't.
intermission understanding.
I'd like to make a motion that this board table this thing, this matter, and that it go back to the building committee to fully vet these numbers out and all of these options again. I would also think that it should go back to the Board of Selectmen before it comes back to us. Unless they don't believe that's necessary and we can have these numbers vetted by the board, because these numbers are all seem to be changing, and after a Board of Selectmen has already voted on this, when I don't know if they fully understand what they were voting on at the time.
Mr. DeWitt, do you have a second?
I will second it, and if I may make a comment.
Please.
If we do go back, if it does go back. So 1B has the different option for the pilings involved in it. If I'm reading this correctly, the pilings are, I'm looking at your option 1 you just gave the presentation on.
Right.
And it said that option 1 was trying to replace the pilings with the building in place.
if you were trying to interpret this the way I understand it, the committee stands by its options and stands by its own record. So we have and did not continue to debate option 3C.
Well, you know what? I don't even want to
I
talk
understand.
3C, because 3C is in nothing we've seen tonight.
Right.
So 3C doesn't mean anything to me.
I understand that,
But
but I'm just saying.
1B, just so I'm clear, 1B, given this presentation, option 1. Okay. Does option 1B include the
Excuse me,
new?
Mr. Mayor.
does-
I think you should retract that, okay? Because the one thing is, we are listening, and what we're hearing is a bunch of numbers that are jumping around, and an option that ended up on our desk that hasn't been vetted by the committee's own chair, who said he didn't have the numbers until November 11th, and they haven't met since that
That is all
date.
misunderstanding, sir.
It was pretty clear to me.
Well, you didn't understand it.
I didn't understand what.
Option 1B on this piece of paper, which is the board, which is the building committee's option 3C, has been vetted to the same extent of all the options, with the exception of option 7.
Okay, let me ask the members of the board of the subcommittee that are sitting here shaking their heads no in the audience that this hasn't been reviewed. And I would ask them to come to the microphone and state whether they have actually reviewed this option or not. Please, come forward.
Well, I don't know if I should finish or not.
No, let's
Okay,
let
yeah.
them come forward, and then we'll ask.
I still have one more point to make, so
Yes, please,
I'll defer.
Mr. DeWitt. We'll go
Yep,
right back
that's
to you.
okay. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Ian Bass, Lally Boulevard, and I am a member of the Penfield Building Committee. And I will attest to the fact that we heard new information at the Board of Selectmen meeting and vote, and we are hearing new information once again today. So I applaud you for picking that out and for taking the steps that you are taking.
Thank you. Anybody else?
To explain what the new information is.
That's fine, and we'll allow that. I just want to make sure, I want to find out where the building committee, I owe them deference because they've worked on this for a year. And if I see a bunch of them in the back of this room saying that this is new information to them, that's not fair to their efforts for a year. And that's my only point. I need to respect the efforts that they put in.
Hi, my name's Jane Nelson. I'm also a member of the committee. I live at 77 West Morgan Avenue. 3C was considered. It was not considered to the extent that the 4 options that we presented in the presentation. Not even close. So this is new that it's on the table. I would also like to request that when we get financial information, that we don't call things 1A and 1B, because Mr. DeWitt, 1A and 1B that's on that paper is not the 1A that was presented in the presentation. Nowhere in what you're looking at is repair in place. So if we can, as we move forward, have some sort of, connection to what we, the committee, have been presenting all along, I think it would make it a little bit easier to understand. It was confusing for us, even at the Board of Selectmen meeting.
So that's, you've made my point, exactly.
Yes.
If we're going to go back and look at options, there are some non-negotiables now. One of them is you're going to put the pilings in place with the building not there. So we don't need to hear any more options with that not in place, right? Because the option 1 here did have that. So I'm with you. We can rename these options A, B, C, that they're very clear and no longer tied back to this presentation.
Well, actually, they should be tied to the presentation. He should call 7, 7, and
1, 1, and 2, 2.
Oh, you only have an option 1. It's Mr. Mayor that has an option A and B.
Mr.
got
Mayor's
it,
option
got it.
1 is not what we've been talking about as option 1
I
for
understand.
a year. So,
My
it's just
my
a
option
confusion.
1 is their option 1. When I label, this would all been clear if I'd been allowed to give my presentation, sir. My option 1B was a summarization developed by myself in a way, when I put these numbers together, based upon information the committee has looked at, based upon information from the committee, the building committee, which turns out to have been, which I did not know when I developed the document, is their option 3C. So it is an option that has been looked at, as the young lady just indicated, by the committee. It is their option 3C. When I first put the document together, I wasn't aware that it was in their book, but it's in their book. You can go right to their book. You can see it.
I'm going to recognize Mrs. Albin, who's been patient here. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Through the chair to Mr. Bradley, the recommendation that you made to the Board of Selectmen, I don't care if it's option A, Z, whatever it is.
Right.
It's taking me back to the 2 high school days. You and I know those well. We got into triple letters to
Right.
identify things, and if it wasn't that, it was redistricting. Your committee has recommended a project with a price tag of $4,558,399.
That's correct.
Do you stand by that recommendation here
Yes.
tonight,
Yes.
even though there's new information?
Yes, well, there isn't actually new information on that one,
No,
but yes, we do.
there's some new numbers.
There's some confusion,
Based
but
on
we
what
stand
you
by
have-
our
Based on
presentation.
what you have now learned, do you feel the need to go back to your committee and revisit this issue and make a different recommendation?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we have a resolution before us, and we have yet to talk about $4,558,399. We are not following Robert's rules. We are not on point, and I would like to get back on point and talk about this resolution. And if the building committee isn't recommending option A or Z or double T, then we should talk about what they recommend and what's in this resolution, and follow Robert's rules.
Thank you, Mrs. Albin. And before I respond, I'm going to recognize Mr. Bolito, who has to come up and speak as a member of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Rob Bolito, Vice Chairman of the Penfield Building Committee. I'd forgotten how much fun this is. I missed this, I tell you. 2 points. There is obviously a disconnect between our presentation and Mr. Mayor's presentation. Disconnect in numbers, disconnect in labeling. We saw Mr. Mayor's report the day of the Board of Selectmen meeting. First we saw it. So that's number one. We're making the presentation on Penfield. Take it for what it is. Number two, as Mrs. Albin pointed out, and I agree with her, what's before you is option 7. You have a bonding resolution before you that is for a specific option that has been passed by the Board of Selectmen. The other options have been presented as comparison to give you basically a spectrum of what we considered in order to come to option 7. But it is for comparison purposes only. This isn't a Chinese menu where you'd pick one from column A, one from column B, as you know. This is one option, one bonding resolution. That is what is before you. That is what is relevant. The other options were presented by us for comparative purposes only, so consider that, please.
Thank you, Mr. Bolito. And a question I have for both of you.
Sure.
And this goes to my concern with this, and I'm speaking only for myself. This option is being presented for us with numbers, and I want to know whether your committee actually had full benefit of that when you made your option 7. Because what I want to do is respect the process that you guys all went through and not vote on something that maybe there was some additional information which you guys haven't met upon after receiving that information to reconsider your option. That's my only thing here, is I want to make sure that the process has been followed and that what you recommended wouldn't change. Now, we've heard that these numbers were presented for the first time at the Board of Selectmen meeting, and then we heard a date of November 11th that Mr. Bradley gave. So what I want to do is make sure that your board, and I don't know, Mr. Bradley, how you can stand behind it, and that's no disrespect to you, if you guys haven't met and discussed this next option that was brought forward after the fact.
Yeah, I have to say that I can only tell you the way we operate. We went through 11 options. We narrowed them down and narrowed them down over a period of time. We used a professional estimating firm, or a professional construction management firm, and spent money on estimating, and we stand by the numbers that we have produced as a committee. It's my understanding with the committee and with the First Selectman's office, who we report to, that we were going to produce, and we have produced, and we will stand behind the numbers, given the estimating criteria. When I say stand behind a number, I'm not saying I'm standing behind a conceptual estimate, but I'm saying we've done the due diligence as far as we can go, and we've put in contingencies where necessary, as best we could, to come up with the options that have been presented to you. We have simply recommended option 7. Our numbers for option 7 haven't changed.
Right.
And our options for number 7 between before the Board of Selectmen meeting and after the Board of Selectmen meeting and in the interim period and to tonight, looking at you, the cost of option 7 that we recommend is still the same. We did not have the benefit, and I'm sure that Mr. Mayor didn't have the benefit because FEMA was giving him information as fast as they could. We didn't have the option, we didn't have the benefit of getting the payment end of it, and we religiously stayed away from that. Our job was to, just as Mr. Bolito said, our job was to consider options and to go through the cost and scope and go through the risk scenarios and do what's best for the town of Fairfield. We believe that option 7 is the best for the town of Fairfield. We have a schematic estimate on option 7. That's where we are. We're presenting one option here tonight. What's happened is, and I can understand it because I've been through this before, once you get FEMA's reimbursement and you start feeding those numbers the way they run their formulas, you could actually pull an option from the past forward because it looks better, but the way FEMA constructs their reimbursement.
Okay, so there's other...
We don't want that option pulled forward.
Okay, so despite the dollar impact of that option, you don't want that option forward for what reason, if I might ask? Why was it eliminated, if it's the same as 3C? Just so that we can get this behind us, we can vote on this motion that's before.
The option, the option, what we call
3 whatever.
the option 3C, which goes back to, I don't know, was the estimated cost at that time was $5.6 million. It was rejected on the basis of cost. In other words, when we started, we had criteria as we examined each option. So, yes.
Okay. It was rejected on the basis of cost because you thought it was $3 million difference, correct?
No. No, at that time, there was only the difference between what Mr. Lombardo's talking about and is $2 million, not $3 million. But we weren't looking at it that way. We were simply looking at every single option we were presented with from the different engineers, including the inspecting engineers, what would be the best way to fix this building? And as we went down, the contractors that came that moved buildings said that it is less expensive to tear down the east wing than it is to move it, tear it down and rebuild it. Once that started through the committee process, we then abandoned, we just said, well, why don't we just take the east wing off and drive this into a different option, which at that particular time was 7. We're moving back and forth over a period of 6 to 7 months between these different options, and being very careful to try and to keep them straight. It was not easy. But the fact of the matter is that the committee came down 7-1 on the basis of option 7 as being the best value for the town of Fairfield, creating a smaller facility, FEMA compliant, on timber foundation piles at the new FEMA elevation, giving a more area around the building, making it just a more balanced facility. If in fact you want to go back and put the east wing back on, okay, that gets to the so-called new number. That gets to the number that Mr. Mayor is talking about, that he asked for, or on around the 10th or 11th, and that is, if we do this, if the FEMA numbers drive this a different direction, it becomes more attractive. And if you look at FEMA's information and it allows you to add the lockers back, is your number, what would you do with your number? So I went back to the estimating team and I said, this thing, this 3C that we all knew by heart, needs to be vetted out. And, well, we don't have any drawings, we don't have any scope. Well, we discussed it, and they said, well, we don't have all the soft costs in there at the time. We've learned more in 4 months, so the number is a little bit higher. That's how the whole thing rolled out. But the committee is here tonight talking about option 7, and we went as far in option 7 as to have the design developments drawings done so that we know from our estimating team, from Shawmut, that we have a better number than just conceptual. So we're very comfortable where we are with option 7. I'm speaking for the committee. And that's our thrust is to become here supporting option 7. This is unraveled or unrolled or rolled out or whatever it has done on the basis of information provided by FEMA over the past 2 weeks.
Chris.
I have a procedural question, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, Mrs. Albin.
Sorry for my tone before that we're not following Robert's rules, because we aren't. We don't have the motion on the floor as we should, and I would like to move, and I will only read the bold print. It's a 4-page motion. A resolution appropriating $4,558,399 for cost associated with the repair and restoration of Penfield Pavilion and authorizing the use of 1.750 of insurance proceeds to fund, that's $1,750,000 of insurance proceeds to fund such appropriation, and the insurance of bonds to fund the portion of such appropriation not funded by insurance proceeds. And then resolved, there goes 4 more pages of information. I won't read that. I would like to move that motion and put it on the floor.
Do we have a second?
Mr. Flynn?
Yeah,
Wait a minute, we already have a motion.
No, it was never put on the floor.
it wasn't.
It was,
Well, it was second.
No,
yes.
you put a motion to amend, to,
Let's,
I seconded the motion.
not
yes,
this,
but
not
let's-
this
Let's
motion.
do this, time out. Mrs. Albin's right. She's right. She's right. Let's put it on the floor.
Right.
So do we have a second to that? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? It's on the floor. Thank you. Now. No. Now, Mr. Walsh, please.
Now, following Robert's rules, and I appreciate Ms. Albin's comments, now I will make my same motion that we table this matter until which time the committee has a full ability to have all of the information before it to vet all of these options, to properly number them so that there's no confusion with the numbers of what we're even considering, since what I'm looking at is 1B, is now I'm hearing 2C, and things like that. And also for a decision to be made by the Board of Selectmen about whether they want to take a look at this after that's all been done.
Do I have a second? Mr. DeWitt. So that item is before us. Any discussion on that item? Mr. DeWitt?
It seems very clear decisions were made with financial numbers without a whole lot of data. And Mr. Lombardo can correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like to me the Parks and Rec Commission made a recommendation based on a $3 million delta that is now not $3 million anymore. And they may be inclined to make a new recommendation based on the new data. So one of the reasons I'm supporting Mr. Walsh's motion is for the Parks and Rec Commission to now go back with a new recommendation with numbers to the Board of Selectmen.
Mr. Brown?
See, and I agree with that. I think the building committee did their job. But Mr. Lombardo has a different view now based on numbers that he saw the night of the Board of Selectmen meeting. And it might be, my thinking is he should have his time to speak with the committee and give his opinion to the committee, even if the committee is set with option 7.
Mr. Brown? Mr. Walsh?
We need time to look at all this information, and one of the questions I've always had in my head, and regardless, and I appreciate the hard work you've done, and I respect everybody on this commission, and I think you know that I've spoken to each one of you individually, and based on your past work, especially Mr. Bolito, who I've served on with this body, so I've worked with him, I know how he works, but this is the Board of Finance, and we do have to look at numbers. And we're now talking about this, what's Mr. Mayor calls option 1B, and there seems to be a delta of about $300,000 between that and what is 7A. We also we'll be losing $38,000 of income from those lockers. Based on my quick calculation here on my calculator, that would take 7.8 years to make up that to make up that $300,000. After that, it becomes a revenue generator for the town, and I think we need to look at that. We had a facility that was already voted on a number of years ago when we decided to relook at this. We looked at this as a town and we wanted to build it, and we have bonds outstanding for that we're paying currently. I think we need to look at this. I think the committee needs to go back with these current numbers, and I think when it comes back, I'd like to see it come back and maybe just option 1, option 2, not A's and B's and things like that. That's what I would like to see. I'd like everybody to be on the same page on this. I'd like the committee to know one last time what they want to do and what their recommendation is, but we'd like to see your numbers, final numbers. I think it should go back to the Board of Selectmen, but it's up to them. I can't force them to do it. But for right now, I'd like to table it.
Anybody else have any comments? Mr. Becker?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm certainly going to support this motion. I've had a lot of questions when it comes to the lockers. The new information at the Board of Selectmen actually sort of surprised me with that information when it came out that it even passed the board at that time. There seemed to be a concern about maybe even delaying it, and maybe that should have been done. But at this point, it's now before our board, and we have the opportunity to do that. I think we should. When you're looking at the numbers, talking about gross numbers and the estimates versus now getting down to the real net costs at the end of the day, that's what everyone's really going to be looking at. That's the most important thing. It's what's actually going to cost the taxpayers at the end of the day. So I'd like to see the committee go back and get that information and then come back to us, obviously with their recommendation, but certainly making sure that we really understand the true differences there, and the differences in the plan, because obviously it's not just the numbers, but there's a different method to doing the two buildings. So I think I'd certainly be open to, when they come back, certainly making sure that we understand the distinct differences between those plans, besides simply you have lockers or you don't have lockers.
Yes. Thank you. This is the way we've always operated when we've done, yeah. Yeah, I allowed it. Go ahead.
As Mr. Walsh said, this is a finance board, and I have a question about FEMA, even though it might be irrelevant, but it's going to come up again. From what I heard, there's been a phone call with FEMA. And we're talking about numbers, and we said, well, I had a phone call with FEMA. Is there anything in writing? And when would we when did they make their decision so that perhaps when this comes before us, we have, okay, here's what FEMA said, this is an alternate plan, or it's a plan is improved plan, and here's what the town of Fairfield is going to receive for this project. When does that happen?
Do you have, Mr. Meredith, you want to answer?
Before I answer that question, I'd like to make a couple of comments, if I may.
You can.
Thank you, sir. First of all, with respect to Ms. Nelson's comments, had I known that the option that I put forth at 1A was in their book at that time as 3C, I would have labeled it 3C. As you noted in my presentation, their option, the committee's option 8 is 8, the committee's option 9 is 9, the 7 is 7, the 1 is 1. Secondly, I would like to apologize for my comment about the not listening, but I was very frustrated because I really believe that had I been able to give my presentation, all of this would have been clear and explained. But I apologize nonetheless. It was still an uncalled for comment. With respect to FEMA, the town first submitted damage estimates to FEMA in July of 2013. The FEMA then takes this information and they massage it and they come up with a number that they then issue in what they call a PW, project worksheet. It has been very frustrating with respect to getting numbers out of FEMA. There's been a change of personnel. There was a sequester. I mean, I don't know. There's all kinds of activities going on at FEMA. Finally, the first selectman contacted our congressional delegation, and there was some pressure put on FEMA from them, I assume, or at least some dialogue with them, and that led to an acceleration of their efforts. And we had a conference call that was held on October 23rd. In that conference call, they indicate, now there's two numbers. Okay, this is another important fact. It is clear, and this is one of the concerns that's been raised by people, is how much, what you're asking, how much is FEMA going to give us? It is certain and clear that FEMA will reimburse us 75% for the cost to repair and replace the facility as it existed before the storm. Okay? It is also clear and certain that FEMA will reimburse us for 75% of the cost to mitigate the facility to prevent similar damage. This would be like the cost of raising it and that type of thing. Now, and then when they finally give us a number, okay, there will be two numbers. There will be a number for cost and repair, and there will be a number for mitigation. The number that we received on October 23rd verbally, and then November 4th via an email, is for repair and replace only. Does not include mitigation. Okay? There will be another number forthcoming with mitigation. Now, the town has applied to FEMA for full replacement. Okay? The reason we applied for full replacement is because that would be an optimal number, number one. In fact, let me go to my notes if I may. Number two, it'll allow us for the most future flexibility, because the town was unclear, undecided what it was going to do. The building committee was, performing their work. And thirdly, if the full amount is approved, and this is important, if the full amount for repair, replace, and fully mitigate is approved, and then if the town, like I said, still has flexibility, if that money isn't fully spent on the facility, any balance of the money that's not spent is still available to the town based upon a 75% reimbursement amount to spend on other projects other than Penfield that serves the benefit of the public interest. Okay? Now, so we know, so basically we have a minimum number, if you will. Now, that minimum number, with, again, is only in an email. We still don't have a formal PW. We're still working to get a formal PW. But you pretty much, I'm looking based upon, my limited knowledge, but the Witt and O'Brien, the associates, the consultants we're working with, have been in this business for years, they're well connected. They feel that 4128 is the minimum number. There's no way of knowing for sure whether 7 would be 7A or 7B. What I called my 1B, I came out because of my concern about 7B. I put the numbers together, and I thought we can do 1A for less than we can do 7B, if that's the way it goes, and not much more. And so the answer is, we know with clarity and certainty that 74% reimbursement. We think we have a minimum number of 4.188, and there has been an acceleration, and we're actually hoping to get more information this month.
Okay, so the follow-up then is, FEMA's not waiting from anything from us. We're just waiting for them.
They have, yes, we are waiting for them, and we're encouraging them very strongly right now.
Okay, so we're waiting for them to verify the 4188 number.
Correct.
Correct. And whether it's an approved or an alternate project.
No, they would not make that designation. I'm sorry, I forgot that part of your question, sir. They would not make that designation until we make a formal request with a submittal that we're going ahead with option 7. That's when they would make the determination whether it was an A or B.
Thank you.
Mrs. Albin, do you have a question?
Through the chairman to Mr. Bradley again. I have a great deal of respect for Mr. Bradley because he has spent, I don't know how many hours of his time giving it away to the town long before some of these people were ever in a room, working on issues like that. And his professional background also merits that kind of respect as well. But I want to ask you, your committee worked, I don't want this committee to become a building committee. We're supposed to make a financial decision, and I want to respect the work of the Penfield Building Committee and rely upon all the work that you've done and not try to do it over again here tonight or however many nights that would take. And that happens too often in this community. But, Mr. Bradley, your committee worked for quite some time on looking at all of these options. As you sit here tonight and you listen to this new information, you can speak for yourself, and you would have to poll your committee. Do you feel that it would be important enough to go back and review this and go through all these options again, or do you think you would come back, or do you have a sense of this building committee that you'd come back with the option you're requesting now?
What has happened here is that the committee noticed the selectmen that we would go as far as the total cost of construction for each of the options we were considering, and then those options that we were putting forward. We specifically excluded in our final report, and for the past couple of months, the role of finance from the fiscal officer and the supporting role as far as substantiating the program income and expenses. All we wanted to do is get to a bottom line to build. We're a building committee. So we stayed out of finances and we stayed out of program. What I think has happened is, because of FEMA's information over the past couple of weeks, it appears that if you put the lockers back on, option 7, if you take option 7 and put the lockers on it and pick up that income, it sounds like you'll end up closer between option 7 with the lockers and without the lockers. I don't know what the difference between those two are, but listening to all this, I think it should be explored. I think that if FEMA, if you run these numbers and you add the income back in from the lockers, because essentially what's going on here is, from our standpoint, is option 7, you would just do option 7, which includes removing the locker wing, and you would just simply add back to option 7, building the new lockers. I know it sounds strange, but it is difficult to move light frame wood construction like the lockers, put them off to the side, and then simply build a new pile foundations and move the lockers back. The recommendation from the contractors are to simply take the lockers down, and there's some issues with the lockers, frankly. So you take the lockers down and then drive the piles. You'd put a different type of pile cap. It's not worth going into, but it would be less expensive than concrete. You would stay with timber, old-fashioned, like dock construction, and you'd put the lockers back. So we would take option 7 and look at it on behalf of the Board of Selectmen to add the lockers back. So you'd really come forward, somebody said option A and option B, or option 1 and option 2. That's what you'd have. You'd have our option 7, which is what we brought forward here tonight. And if you're saying go back to the drawing board, based on information provided out of Mr. Mayor's office, and add the lockers back because Parks and Rec would like it, and there's an income stream for it, so be it. We're in the business of doing what's best for the town. Our options right here, and the history of our options is really pretty clear. I don't want to get into tit for tat here, but it's pretty clear as to what we've said we've done. I'm not sure about the numbers, but the option of adding the lockers back was discarded because it was a premium at that time, and we were going through options in the way you would ordinarily go through them.
So do you feel that it would be beneficial for your committee to take another look at this? Is that what you're saying?
I think.
Or do you feel that we should...
Wouldn't benefit the committee, it might benefit the community, which is more important.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm asking
Would
on
benefit-
behalf of the
it would-
community.
If these numbers are what they are, and I have no reason to doubt it, it means that the spread between the lockers and the no lockers is closer to what this body should consider. And you've lost the summer of 2015. The committee's not going to rest until we give you the information you need. We'll have a special meeting if it's necessary.
Okay, thank you.
So we have no problem with this.
Mr. Bradley, you summed it up quite well, because that's why I do think this is the purview of the Board of Finance, and we're not becoming a building committee, is the fact that one of the things that I've heard in the community is, if we're going to spend the money to build this, why aren't we getting the lockers back? Because it's an income stream. And to your point, and to the point about being respectful to your committee and the work they've done, this is new available information. And Mr. Mayor, I don't envy your position, because you just got this information from FEMA within the last couple of weeks. I kind of get that, right? But your committee hasn't had the opportunity to review that information in one sitting body to go through it. You've looked at it yourself and say, hey, we stand behind our option 7, and I get that. And with the due diligence that you guys collectively has done, I can fully appreciate that. But to your point, you now have the option of maybe getting those lockers back at an incremental cost that may or may not be palatable to the community, correct?
Correct. But the system, if you want to keep momentum into this whole project, doesn't do well with just leaving tonight with options. What would really benefit is if there was a sense, and I gather there is a sense, that the committee should come back, since the numbers are now make this option of adding the lockers back more attractive, that they should take their option 7, which we're recommending, and add the lockers back, because the Board of Finance would like to know, given the added income stream of $28,000 a year, how does that work? We have no problem with that.
Thank you, Mr. Bradley. I think that's well said. Can you amend your motion then?
Yes, I will amend my motion to table this until such time as the building committee has a chance to go back and reconsider option 7 with the lockers versus
Correct.
without the lockers, and speaking to Mr. Lombardo about what the revenue generation portion of that is, for you to take that into account in your analysis.
We would be happy. I have to keep my committee together. And we would be very happy coming back with option 7A and 7B. And that's it, without two different presentations.
Do we have a second to that?
And-
Mr. DeWitt?
Ready to second it again?
Mr. DeWitt,
And
second.
that they would also work with the chief fiscal officer, because if there's changing information with FEMA, I think Mr. Bradley's got to be brought into, and his committee's got to be brought into that loop.
That'd be great.
Yes.
So if your committee comes back in December with 7B, and it's the best number ever, but it's different than the one that's on that bond proposal in front of us, does that not have to go to the Board of Selectmen, or can we amend the bond resolution?
We can amend the bond resolution.
Cool? I'm in.
Yes, Mr. Mayor? Then I'll go to Mr.
Pro-
It's off. I think.
off.
Point of process. If the building committee met, and the Parks and Rec, and everybody got together and made a decision that they would prefer option 3C, and then brought it back here,
We just said what it contained.
Yeah,
It's
just
option
talk about it
7
with what
the
it
lockers.
contains and not by letters and
well,
numbers.
it's
Just say it's with or without
whatever,
the
whatever you want
lockers.
to call it. My 1A, the
Right.
7B with the lockers, or 3C, which are all the same number. Well, it's all the same project, 7 with lockers. That would be a material change, I think, to the resolution. So if the board
We'd have to vote it back, and it'd have to
have
go
to go
back
back
to
to the Board of Selectmen, which would delay the process a month.
As opposed to just
As
rejecting
opposed to
this.
just rejecting or taking no action, in which case it would automatically have to go back to the Board of Selectmen.
I think Mr. Mayor's correct in that analysis, and to be quite honest with you, I would like it to go back to the Board of Selectmen.
Okay,
So with that, I would like to withdraw my motion,
okay.
and I would like to, and Chris, you'll withdraw your second?
I will withdraw my second.
And that we make a motion at this point to take no action. I'm not going to make a motion that this board make a motion to take no action.
Do we have a second to that?
I'll gladly second that.
Okay. Do we have any discussion on that? Okay. All in favor of taking no action on this item? Those opposed? Abstentions. So we'll take no action on this item, and we'll send it back.
Thank you.
Okay? Thank you. Mr. Mayor, thank you. I'm going to take a 5-minute recess here before we consider the next and final item. We have one more item on the agenda. I'm going to make sure this goes before us, so do I have a motion to put this before us? Is to hear, consider, and adopt an updated fund balance policy. Do I have a motion? Mr. Brown, do I have a second? Mrs. Leclerc, the item is now before us, and I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Walsh, who chaired our subcommittee on this item. Mr. Walsh and Mary and Catherine, thank you for all your hard work and effort on this. Go right ahead, Mr. Walsh.
When we last met on this, we had an extensive conversation of the proposed fund balance policy. I had prepared a sample and put in many of the recommendations, or all of the recommendations that our committee had come out with our formal recommendation, and put those into a policy. Following, towards the end of the meeting, when we finally discussed it, various members had made some suggestions on some changes they'd be more comfortable with, and I thought we had come to a consensus on some of what those changes were. And Tom, you and I were directed to make those changes into a formal policy that hopefully we could vote on this evening. So, I'm going to go over what those changes were, just so to refresh everyone's memory, to show that those changes were put into this policy. I put something in front of each one of you, which was a revision for a couple of small word changes. So I would ask that everybody look at the one that says up in the upper right-hand corner, revised 11/12/2014. Does anybody want me to quickly go over the 3 words I changed from the one that was originally emailed to you, verse the one on 11/12? No, in all three cases, they just changed there was a couple times the word unrestricted was used, and it needs to be, say, unassigned. And this has to go back to the GASB 54 changes that were recently made regarding fund balance, and that you just don't use the word unrestricted anymore. You have to use one of the definitional terms that's on page 2, because unrestricted is now broken up into 3 categories: committed fund balance, assigned fund balance, or unassigned fund balance. And the one we're really concerned about here, as this body, in regards to when we kind of talk about fund balance, is the unassigned fund balance, because that's what the credit agencies look at. So there was 3 times, I could point them out if people want, where the word unrestricted still stayed in from a previous model that I was using. 2 of them were in, if you look under guidelines, right under guidelines, it says the appropriate level of the previous version said unrestricted fund balance, so it just says unassigned now. The heading down towards the bottom of the page where it says the circumstances of which it used to say unrestricted, I put now unassigned fund balance can be spent down. And then there was one other, the word unrestricted I changed to unassigned. So there's just 3 instances of that. But other than those changes, I will quickly go over the substantive changes that this body seemed to come to consensus on, the change that they wanted to be made. The first, and we're going to go right to guidelines, which is on page 3, that we changed the floor from what the committee recommended of 8% to be 7.25%, at least for the next, for the fiscal year 15, because we wanted to be in conformance with our policy, because our fund balance was looking like it's going to be 7.53, I think, the last time we met. Has there been any update on where, with the audit that's still going on, whether there's been any adjustments, negative or positive, that might change that, what was estimated to be a 7.53 fund balance number?
You're talking about fiscal 14, not 15.
Fiscal 14.
We're a little bit higher than that preliminarily from the auditors.
Okay.
7.6-ish, which was a change in the encumbrance number.
Okay, so that's a positive, at least right now, but the audit's not done yet?
Correct.
Okay, okay. So that's at least looking positive. So our 7.25 number that we had talked about for fiscal year 15 seems like it'll still be a good number, and we'll be in compliance with that. Then we had said that for the next year, fiscal year 2016, that the floor would be set at 7.5, which, once again, if the numbers are coming in pursuant to where they are right now, we'd also be in conformance with that. As many of you know, we talked to, our whole goal is to get up to the floor being 8%, but maybe with a year or 2 of surpluses, God help us, we will get there on our own without having to tax the taxpayers for those additional funds. Before I move on from that, does anybody have any difference of opinion on that change? Because we'll just deal with them one at a time. No. Seeing none? Okay. In the areas where and then the next thing says, we talk about the ceiling, about being the 11%, and what we can apply for. We talked about moving, being able to transfer such funds to the town's internal service fund, so that's in there as one of the things we could do if we hit the ceiling. While we're there, just, I talked to, first of all, in that little package of documents, there's an email from, I ran this by Matt Smerndell from Phoenix Advisors, who works with us with the credit agencies and bonding, and he thinks the policy meets all the financial and credit agency requirements. So it meets all of his. I also ran it by the Joe Centofanti, and he did get back to me shortly, about 5 o'clock today. And he had a couple of small recommendations. So as I go through it, I did not have time to incorporate them in. Where it says the town's internal service fund, he also questioned whether we, he's like, this is stylistic, whether we also wanted to say pension fund or OPEB. I don't have a problem with that, just to add the words
I don't
pension
either.
fund or OPEB. It just gives us more flexibility once we go over, the ceiling.
Fine, I'll make a motion that we amend that section to say pension fund and OPEB. Do I have a second to that? Second, Mr. Brockfeld, any, all in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That motion carries. Yeah.
Sure. It's under page 3 under guidelines. It was number 2 where it says transfer such excess to the town's internal service fund, and then it will say comma, pension fund and slash or
OPEB.
OPEB, O-P-E-B, all capitals.
You got it, Deb? Thank you. Okay.
Sure.
Back on the fiscal year 2016.
Yes.
Did you mean 16 and not 15?
Yes, we did mean 16.
But you're going from,
7.25 for 15 to 7.5 for 16.
okay, so you're not going to speak to fiscal
We're
14?
we're leaving it at the same at the 7.25. That was the intent last time.
Yes. And since fiscal year 14's already passed, I think it makes sense to just say we're in fiscal year 15 now, so
Exactly.
that's going to be the guideline for this year.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. The next change was right underneath that 1, 2, 3, 4, where it says, further, once the unassigned fund balance is greater than 8%, the Board of Finance may transfer any excess above the 8% to the town's internal service fund. And I think this was one of the issues that, Tom, you raised, which was between 8 and 11. Since we've had some issues with the internal service fund, and since the credit agencies have discussed it in their language on saying things that we were having problems with, if we had a really bad year with the internal service fund, but we're above the floor, we wouldn't have to wait to get to the 11% ceiling before we could use some, potentially, if we all decided as a board, to be able to use some of those funds. But we couldn't go below the floor.
Correct.
Did I just want to make sure I wrote that correctly and it meets everyone's, everyone's
Yes.
happy with that.
From what I understand, yes. I don't know, does anybody else have a comment on that?
The only question I have is, does that mean that number should be 7.25/7.5? Or
No, we had, thanks, Ken, for the comment. As I recall, the committee's recommendation was originally they wanted to be at 8%. But we didn't want to pass a policy that we were already out of compliance with. So we set the floor at 7.25 with a marker that once we get to 8, it gives us the flexibility. We don't want to bring that marker down below 8 because we really want to hit that 8 and then have the flexibility after that number. Do you see what I'm saying?
no problem with the numbers, but does that mean that, I'm sorry. Does that mean that the 7.5 moves up to 8?
We didn't move it up to 8 because we didn't want to cause,
No, I mean, eventually, does it move up to 8?
Yes.
yes, we would
We're-
like it to, yes.
Some of the discussion that happened last time was that, yes, the
Oh,
committee
I know it was
wanted, the committee wanted it to be at 8. So we'd start off to be in compliance, 7.25, and then the next year, 7.5. Then the committee would meet again. Let's
okay.
see what market conditions are, let's see what credit agency requirements are, let's see, maybe, I mean, it's our hope that 1 or 2 more years of surplus, we'll be at 8 already, and then maybe we switch it to 8.
Exactly. Well said. Mr. Stone.
Just to go back a little bit, on the unassigned fund balance greater than 11%, is that's what the committee's recommending?
The committee recommended all except we did not talk about the town's internal service fund. We kind of off the cuff spoke about it, but we didn't put it in our formal recommendation. But I think, Mary, I think we had talked about it, and I'm not sure, Catherine, whether you were at that meeting, maybe we all talked about it, that, this is one of the things we could move it towards. I think it's better that we put it in there, just like I have no problem with the OPEB, even though we're hitting our arc right now. Things can happen, and if we want to have flexibility on what we want to do, I think some of those are areas that we could get dinged by a credit agency if they were low for some reason.
So it couldn't be at 10%?
It could be at 10%. The committee met, we talked about 10% a little bit. One of the, and Mary was a proponent, and I got on board pretty quickly on why it was 11, was if you looked at that chart that I produced the last time of all the AAA credits in the state of Connecticut, and you looked, as I showed you, other than Greenwich, which I said was an anomaly because they don't have any borrowing, so they're allowed to have that low amount. We were the lowest. But when you looked at other towns, there was a number, I could probably look for that chart again, but that were at 11%. There was 4 or 5 of them hovering right now at 11%. So I think Mary pointed out, and I quickly agreed, that I thought that since they were at 11% already. Yeah, and the average was also just slightly less than 11, but close to it. So we thought that would be a good ceiling. We don't want to, I'm not trying to get this thing up to 14% because I don't want to tax. I want to start giving the taxpayer.
I'm just looking at the tax implications.
Sure. Catherine, you had a question? Mrs. Alvin?
We talked about 10 and 11. I don't know that we actually voted or whatever. I think I might have been, more comfortable with the 10%.
You weren't there when the 10% was being discussed, because Mary
Okay.
brought it up on her own to me when there was just the 2 of us, and then you arrived, and we brought you up to speed, and then we voted on it.
That's right. I agree with Mr. Stone. The only thing is, the higher we go on that ceiling, we then require ourselves to try to reach that, and then we're actually overtaxing the taxpayers. That's one way to look at it. Other people could find a different view.
It's not really, I don't see it as of taxing the taxpayer, because I think after we get to a certain point, we are not trying to increase it, except if we have surpluses. And basically, from year to year, if we have a surplus, it'd be added. We're not on some track where we're saying, okay, over the next 5 years or 10 years, we're going to get to that 11.
Right.
Really, I think the only track we're trying to really get to is the floor.
And the only
Anything
other...
that happens with surpluses after that, happen with surpluses.
Right. The only other question is, if we set the ceiling, and some of the towns were much higher than this, but then their circumstances may be different than ours and why they can get to 14%.
Yep.
But do the rating agencies start to look at us and say, you're only sitting at 8, why, and it's 4 years, why haven't you made progress toward the 11? I don't know if that will happen.
In my reading
don't
of the
know.
other policies, most of them seem, and I've read 40 to 50 policies, they mostly have a range. So that's not like you're trying to hover at one number. You have a range. Most of them have a bottom range, so that a Board of Finance or even the Board of Selectmen or mayor gets involved at a certain point if you go below that, so that you don't start affecting your credit rating. But there's normally a range, and I'd say 80 to 90% of the policies I read had a range of some, and it's mostly 2 to 3%.
Just how wide
And
And I just wanted to say, a lot of the guidance we were looking at had 15%. So we were trying to not overtax everyone and keep it within reason. And that's why we were looking at what the average AAA town had.
And I would direct you to look at the bullet points below, because this language comes right out of GASB of the reasons why a board like ours might have a significantly higher minimum target. And one of them is exposure to natural disasters, hurricanes. Well, we were just talking here tonight about the damage from 2 hurricanes. We are on the coast. We are exposed to hurricanes that come up and water damage, and we are exposed to the amount we were talking about this evening. So it's like you can't ignore that fact. So it's just one of those things, and I think we manage it. I think going slightly higher to an 11% is not the worst thing on the planet. We are also, with our ranges, certainly not going near the higher levels. At best, we could say we're in the 3rd to 50% range.
Yep.
Of AAAs.
Yep. Mr. Brown?
So, therefore, I think we should keep it at 11%. I don't think we should take ourselves below the average. And you guys did your due diligence, you came up with 11, you voted on it, you agreed to it, right? So I think we should stick with it.
I think another couple things. Even if you're uncomfortable with the individual percentage, we've put a safety valve in here that says that every 2 years, the board will look at it. So if facts on the ground change relative to our pension, relative to our OPEB, relative to that, in 24 months, a board will be looking at this in order to determine that. The other thing is, Jim and I did go before the RTM. Jim did the bulk of the presentation and did a great job. And one of the things that the RTM was very happy with this policy, for lack of a better way to put it. They seemed quite supportive of the policy. The comments were, in large measure, positive towards the policy. And, you know, one of the things they were concerned about was what I would refer to as the safety valve, which is if, in fact, there was a disaster or some reason that we needed to pull this money, right, and not hit this, had we given ourselves the opportunity to do so. And we did, and if you can see, we have all those items listed as to why we might need to pull the safety valve. The auditors and Mr. Sperndel also commented that they were very happy with this concept. The provision that I refer to as do no harm, which is that each year by the percentage, God forbid the budget goes up, we have to increase the number that we put into that. And they seemed largely supportive. They were very happy with that. And the RTM didn't say, oh my God, that's a showstopper. They asked what the implications were of that, as you would expect and hope that they would. And we explained to him that we're already putting money away. And Jim explained to him what the economic impact of this would be, plus the concept of the fact that we have had the good fortune of having some surpluses and give us that. And again, not to put words in their mouth, but they seemed largely comfortable or positive with that as well towards the end of the discussion. Please.
You said every 2 years. Is there like a date? Is it before we do the budget, things like that? That's what I mean.
It has a date in it. If you look at
Okay.
the second to right above where it says the circumstances in which the unassigned, with that underlined part, the paragraph above there, which was new language, says will reconvene, may reconvene beginning in July 2016.
And by the way, what we said, and I'm the one, I mean, I went to Jim originally had, will reconvene. I asked him to soften the language only because, A, we can't necessarily mandate what our successors will do, and B, you might have a board that sits here, looks at the numbers and says, we don't need to reconvene. We feel pretty good about where we are right now, so let's punt this another couple of years given the facts on the ground. And we wanted to allow whoever that may be the opportunity to do that as well.
And I told Tom, I thought July'd be a good time to start that meeting because you'd have a chance to talk about, see where your benchmark other towns are and things like that. But you also get ready for the September fourth quarter meeting where we start finding out what the estimate of surplus is and where our fund balance is. So it's a good time to probably try to think about that. Okay, just Mr. Centofanti, in regards to that line about further, once the unassigned balance is greater than 8%, the Board of Finance may transfer any excess above the 8% to the town's return service. He liked it. He suggested it go up right under the first paragraph, and I don't think that's a bad idea because it's a little choppy the way it was. So if someone, I'll make a motion that we move that, just that one sentence, up to the bottom of the first paragraph under guidelines.
I'll second that. Any questions, comments? All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That carries.
The next paragraph, Tom already started,
Sorry about
which is basically the no harm done provision, which requires us as expenditures increase, and we all have to budget then for what the amount we need to add to the surplus on a budgeted way so that the fund balance doesn't fall behind. And I think the only question I have for this, and I talked to Mr. Centofanti about that today, is do we want to have a certain point where that stops? So say for example, we're above 8. Say we're at like 9%. Do you still have to budget for it not ever going down? Because otherwise, what you're going to have is it's not going to have a range anymore between 8 and 11. You're only going up. Do you understand what I'm talking about? So the question was, he said, you might want to build in, until it reaches
11%.
Well, we could do that. He just wanted us, he's like, have you guys fully thought about that? Because otherwise it's really,
Yeah.
I don't have a problem with it. No, just, yeah, exactly. Then we just leave it the way it is.
Right.
So I personally don't have a problem with leaving it, but I just wanted to raise
I
the
don't
issue.
have a problem leaving it either.
Okay. All right. The next change was right at the last paragraph in this section, right above where it says the circumstances in which the unassigned fund balance may be spent down. This is where we put that the Board of Finance will receive a report on the fund balance yearly at its fourth quarter meeting, fourth quarter review meeting. Every 2 years, the Board of Finance's Fund Balance Committee may reconvene beginning July 2016 in order to determine whether our fund balance policy needs to be updated or revised in any way. Okay.
So does anybody have it? It's the items before us. so-
Well, there's one other change, which
Sure.
I actually like that Mr. Centofanti said, so this is my last one. And then it gets to the very last section, the policy of replenishing the fund balance. Excuse me, the policy for replenishing deficiencies. Thank you. It says, if the unassigned fund balance, the language I added, if the unassigned fund balance goes below the floor, the Board of Finance needs to be advised of this fact at its next scheduled meeting. Mr. Centofanti's, I think in his own town, has a similar provision. He says, but he would add the words, or is projected, so that if the administration knows we have an issue, we're going to be going negative, we should have that information as soon as possible to be able to make changes as early as possible.
Right. It's
Kind
not
of
that
like what
you've
happened
broken-
last year,
Right.
when we were at, stopped expense payment, you know what I mean, in order to, because we had a problem. So I would like to make a motion after the words where it says, if the unassigned fund balance, I would like to add, is projected or goes below the floor, is projected to go, or actually goes below the floor.
I second that motion. Any questions, comments on that? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you.
And that's all the changes we made, and I have nothing further at this point other than to put the full revised, unless, Chris?
Go ahead.
No, just one quick question to the, I don't know what page this is. The page before the last page where you talk about every 2 years, the Board of Finance may reconvene, beginning in July. So July of 2016 isn't actually 2 years from when this will be adopted.
Right.
So in July is, per our Budget Committee, we actually don't have a meeting in July. Now, I know the committee may, so I don't know if you want to be that specific to call out a month in a year?
I think the reason I put that in was that after July 1st of 2016, we actually get into fiscal
Oh, the
17.
fiscal year. That's good.
So I'm trying to line it up for the next fiscal year.
So you're saying that we won't look at this again until at least July 2016, two fiscal years from now?
And then the
Well,
committee
okay,
will
that's fine.
reconvene. It might take a while. It could take 6 months to look at things and wait to see what our surplus balances are. I mean, it might take a while.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Anybody else have anything?
Yep, good.
Okay, so the item is before us is
Yes.
amended. All in favor? Opposed? Abstentions? That item carries. I'd like to once again thank that committee for a great job. Mr. Walsh, thank you for your legal ease in guiding that
Can I have
process.
a moment of...
Yes, you can.
Two things. First of all, I've never cleared out a room before like this.
We meant to talk to you about that, Jim.
And number two, in regards to our earlier discussion, I'm not going to get into factual stuff, but I meant to, at the end of that, give kudos actually to Mr. Mayor, because his job with this whole FEMA thing has been very complex. The rules have changed. They've hidden the rules. We've had to, at least on the representation, the first selectman had to get our congressional delegation in to assist in finding out what the rules are. So, based on all that, I just wanted to give kudos to him, because I think in the end, what we're all trying to do, and Bob, I think you've been trying to do that, is give us the most accurate numbers, because I guess as me as a Board of Finance member doesn't want to vote on something, find out it's costs X, and then a month and a half from now, find out, oh, my decision, oh, FEMA just came out with some other new reg. I mean, and we might not ever be able to prevent that, but some of the work and things you've been getting in and the changes are not, number one, your fault. They've been coming in over the last 30 days, and numbers have been changing even after the Board of Selectmen meeting. So I understand that must be frustrating. It's frustrating for us to have the numbers change and for the Board of Selectmen to hear the numbers are changing. But I just wanted to just state that I respect the difficult position you're in with lack of knowledge and something that's new and seems to be ever-changing.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, yeah.
Yeah, I understand that. One of the problems is, even if we get these numbers from FEMA, God only knows if they're going to change real quickly again. The other thing is, I know with flood insurance and all that stuff that we've been going through with FEMA, that they've changed elevations, that houses have to be built, they've lowered them, they've raised them. It's a real problem. So we have to take some sort of a broad picture what we're going to do, because it changes. I don't think they know sometimes.
And I think those items are very well said. I think one of the things tonight, and one of the reasons why I voted to kind of punt this is, quite frankly, we impaneled a group of citizens that worked really hard for 12 months. And it's obvious by the level of due diligence that they laid out that they tried to do the best job possible. And if, in fact, this option came up because of better available information late in the process that came after they voted and after they had the opportunity to fully consider those options, as I think Mr. Bradley so eloquently put, particularly when it comes to tearing down something that's already existing. I think we owe it to at least allow those committee members, particularly as well when they're sitting in the back of the room going, we haven't considered this, to be able to look at it and make sure that they're still fully on board with what the recommendation is. And that's it.
Yeah. I agree with you, but the one thing I just don't want to get into is that and it came up tonight, we're the Board of Finance. We're not to micromanage a project.
That's right.
We're here to fund it, or to see if the town can afford it, stuff like that. But I don't want to get into the...
And that's why you got to look at the revenue projections
Right,
and see if they break
exactly,
out.
exactly. That's what we should be doing.
And that was a little surprising to me, that the committee's making decisions, and then one time I'm hearing them say, oh, well, we looked at the numbers and it wasn't really feasible. But yet they don't even have an idea of what the revenue numbers are and whether that makes the decision better to go the other way. So, I think it behoove the committee to see the whole picture and know the math and know what the reimbursement percentages are and see Mr. Mayor's calculations.
Yeah. So I thank everybody for their work and effort tonight. We weren't elegant in the first part of the meeting, but I think we probably reached the right conclusion. You don't want to see how the sausage is made, but,
You saw it tonight.
You saw it tonight. So with that in mind, all in favor of adjournment? You got the motion? We got a second? All in favor? Aye, opposed? Good night, everybody.
Well said.